Hi, I'm Mayor Michael Taylor. Welcome to the 2020 Virtual State of the City. For this year's event, I've had important conversations with experts on topics including the coronavirus pandemic, racial justice and equity in Sterling Heights. Join me in this segment as I talk to a panel of experts about ways that the city of Sterling Heights can address racial inequality and police reforms. Welcome back to the 2020 State of the City. I'm Mayor Michael Taylor. And for our third segment, joining me is a panel to discuss racial injustice and equity in Sterling Heights. Our guests include Darlene King. Darlene is the Executive Director of the Michigan Diversity Council, and she owns her own small business, Life's Journey Training and Consulting. She's currently working with the city's African American Coalition to help develop the city's Racial Equity Action Plan. Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you for having me.
We also have with us Joel Rutherford. Joel is the chair of the official Democratic Black Caucus of Macomb County. He is actively engaged in efforts to increase voter turnout, and he's emphasizing participation in the electoral process by people of color. Joel is also a member of our city's African American Coalition. Thank you for joining me, Joel.
Thank you for having me, Mayor.
We also have with us Dale Dwozikowski. Dale is the police chief here in the city of Sterling Heights. Chief Dwozikowski has been with the city's police department since 1996, and he's been the chief for the past 3 years. Chief's been actively involved in law enforcement for the past 25 years. Thank you for being here with us, Chief.
Thank you.
So I want to jump right into it, Darlene. What we're doing this year for our State of the City is highlighting the three huge crises that are converging on the city all at once. The public health aspect of this pandemic, the economic impact of the pandemic. And back in March and April and even early May, it would have been hard to believe that another issue would have captured the nation's attention and diverted our attention in a way that racial justice and inequity has. I want to ask you about that, going back to, I believe it was May 25th of this year, when the actions of a police officer in Minneapolis created an awakening and really an uprising in our country that we haven't seen in decades. I want to ask you about what that incident has meant to you and how we in the city of Sterling Heights should be reacting to it and preparing to make sure something like that doesn't happen here.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. For me, as a Black female with Black parents and nieces and nephews, it was just another situation that occurred, that things that were happening in private were now made public, and made public before everyone's eyes as we were sitting because of the pandemic and sitting because of the national health crisis that's going on in our country. And so it was really alarming for me. Once again, we have another situation with community policing and unrest in the Black and African American communities. It is one of the main reasons why I do the work that I do. And so when we look at a situation like a George Floyd and many others that have happened before him and even others that have happened after him, the question becomes, what should we collectively as a society be doing to make change so that this doesn't occur again? And it's really about engagement. It's about listening. It's about having the hard conversations, because those are the conversations that we don't like to have and that we don't want to have. People don't want to have a conversation about race because they feel like it's going to incite more injustices and it's going to incite more anger. But you have to have the courageous conversations so that you can get to some resolutions and solutions about equity. And that is what everyone in society needs to be doing. So it's not just an individual's responsibility, it is corporations, it is for-profit, it is nonprofit, it is municipalities. We have to collectively unite together as a unified effort to say no more, and we're going to move forward in unity.
Yeah, thank you. I hear the word equity used. It's a word you just highlighted, and I want to ask you, Joel. We hear all the time about racial injustice, but now, over these last few months, we've really heard a push for equity. Can you explain what the term racial equity means to you, and how the city of Sterling Heights, and really any other city, can emphasize that and make sure that we're doing everything we can to promote racial equity?
Well, Mayor, it's really about fairness is what it is. It's because so often that, you'll hear this word about equality. But the thing about it is our black community and other communities of color are so far behind that if you just make things equal, that's basically like saying the status quo. What we need is equity. What we need is a fair chance and a fair opportunity at things. And that involves government, that involves business, that involves the community as a whole to basically come together and say, look, we're going to do something to really make a difference. That's why, in our caucus, we push so much about getting people involved in, say, the political process, because without representation, people feel like, their voices aren't really heard. So that's also part of that equity, situation, that you have to have people there that feel like, okay, the communities are represented in all communities, and that they feel like they have a fair chance at the resources. Because too oftentimes, especially as what COVID-19 has shown, is that the black community is disproportionately affected by that because of the fact we don't have the health care that we really need to have. And that's why we're being affected in that way. And that's all part of that discussion when it comes to equity.
Right. So I appreciate that. And I want to bring the chief into this discussion too. But before I get there, Darlene, I want to ask you, in your work for helping businesses and helping organizations like the city of Sterling Heights find out where we can do a better job at increasing diversity and promoting racial equity, one of the main intersections of where this particular crisis has been seen is the intersection between race and policing. Tell me, what is unique about policing, and why is it that we're seeing these examples across the country? And specifically, if you could talk about ways that you think that the city of Sterling Heights, and really every city or every policing jurisdiction, needs to be aware of the problem, and what steps that they can take to promote equality and justice.
It is about cultural competency. It is about the police department having the ability to really go back to what we refer to it as community policing, and really knowing the residents and really understanding who the residents are. But then going back to that equity piece is really understanding what are the struggles that they have. What are some of the disadvantages that they have? What are some of the things that systemic and institutional racism has marginalized these communities and these individuals to cause them to be so far behind and have so many challenges in life? So when I think about the police department and community and what their role is and what they can do, it's really about having cultural competency training and understanding the individuals that live within their community and what the challenges are. Equity is about giving an individual what they need to succeed. And so this individual over here may not need as much as that one, but that individual may need a little bit more help or a little bit more understanding or a little bit more support. That's how you get to true equity. And that's what's going to cause these instances of continued police brutality and continued lack of distrust that we see in communities between the police and the community. It's about that community outreach and engagement. It's about police having unconscious and implicit bias training. It's about them having cultural competency training. But it's also about the community having the ability to trust their local police officers and know who they are, that they can literally engage with them, opposed to it always being heads butting against each other.
So when you say community outreach and engagement, I think our chief's ears perk up, because isn't that really what our core program is here in Sterling Heights, Chief? And could you talk about the core program and how the city of Sterling Heights, under your leadership, our police department, has been really putting an emphasis on engaging our community, doing community policing, and getting to understand the community that our police department serves?
Yeah, Darlene was right. She said there has to be trust. Our crime stats just came out. Again, Sterling Heights, one of the safest big cities in the United States. We're the safest big city in the state of Michigan, and that's because of trust. And I said it from day one. A couple news agencies says, what is the secret sauce in Sterling Heights? And I said, well, here's the secret sauce. In Sterling Heights, when something is wrong, unusual, suspicious, our residents trust that when they call the police department, we'll show up in a timely manner and we'll take care of the problem. And we'll do that without any discrimination, and we'll be fair and equitable in our actions. So we have earned that trust. They call us, and that's kind of the agreement that we have, and that's what keeps crime down in a community. Once you lose that trust, or a resident feels that they're not represented, or you're not part of their police department, it's gonna be a long, hard fight to get that trust back with those residents. And so we fight every single day with our community outreach and resident engagement program, our core program. We have a neighborhood officer for each area of our city, and they do cases where neighbors aren't getting along, excessive noise complaints, stuff from fireworks, COVID issues, you name it, any ongoing long-term problem with our residents, we send our core officer out there, and they're kind of like a personal liaison to that problem at that household at that moment. It works great. It's that customer service. And again, the resident, when they're done, says, wow, that was awesome. The cops showed up, they did what they said they were going to do, and the problem's gone. You earn that trust, you earn that resident's respect for months, years later, and they will call you when there's a problem, and they'll be part of the solution, which our residents have been outstanding with. But we've been doing a lot of other things, Mayor Taylor. Just after we heard loud and clear, this summer was something I've never seen in my 25 years. People wanting change, wanting more visibility, accountability. Every single one of my officers, all 152 sworn, did implicit bias training in August, de-escalation training. We completely redid our use of force policy. We now kind of are the 8 national standards of police use of force. We comply with all of those things. Our recruitment program is on hitting on all cylinders. We're, again, another round of recruitment starting, trying to make sure we hire officers that look like the people that live in the city. And we've done a tremendous job with our recruitment efforts over the last 4 years and become much more diverse. A lot more room to go and grow, but we're doing those things, and we're making those steps.
Joel, I want to ask you, because one of the things I know about you is that you are actively working to try to get people who might otherwise feel marginalized part of the political process, either being involved in running for office. You and I have talked about how can we recruit more people in Sterling Heights to have an active role in our boards and commissions, whether it doesn't have to be city council, but it could be planning commission or our zoning board of appeals, or just working in our city hall, so that our city hall and our police department and our fire department and all these different areas of our city sort of reflect what the makeup of the community is. Can you tell me and talk to me, in your work in that space, how important is it to have a police department that reflects the makeup of the community for building trust, like Darlene said earlier?
Oh, it's paramount, because if people don't see, police officers that look like them, especially when they come into the communities, regardless of what it's for, there's always that certain apprehension that's there. One of the things that I was sad to see change is it used to be police officers had to live within the communities they served. And I think that connection really helped, because they were truly part of the community. I know that's no longer the law, but I think if communities can do that, it makes a big difference. Because I think if you live there, your attitude about it isn't, I'm just going to work for, an 8, 10, 12-hour shift, and then I go home to wherever that is. But I'm part of this community, and therefore I want to make sure that it's the best I can possibly do. I think your attitude on the job is different,
a big buzzword we've heard a lot over the past several months is defunding the police. And it's a very political term and means different things to different people. Darlene, I want to ask you, in terms of defunding the police or not defunding the police, I think most people would agree that we need to put a bigger emphasis on investing in our communities, investing in our neighborhoods, whether it's taking away from police budgets or supplementing on top of them. What sort of investments do you think cities like Sterling Heights can make to ensure that we do the best we can to avoid these situations like we've seen in other cities before they even happen?
You know, I think that the city of Sterling Heights can do what it has already begun to embark upon, like developing a coalition that is listening to the people of the community and bringing the people together. When I think about the work that we do here in Michigan, and I think about the work that we do nationally, I have to honestly say this is the first city that I have seen to say, hey, we are going to be proactive about this scenario. We're going to be proactive about this situation. We are going to go to the African American community and to our African American residents and to any other minority groups within our community to say, hey, we want to hear from you because we want you to help us and we want you to be engaged with us creating a better city of Sterling Heights. Those are the things that has to happen. This work is about intentionality. And if you are not intentional about making change, if you are not intentional about changing the dynamics and changing the commentary and the rhetoric around race and equality and inclusion, then nothing is going to happen. So cities have to do some of the things that you're already doing. The police chief already talked about, we've done bias training, we've done de-escalation training. We're trying to change our policies and our processes in the way that we engage and interact. That's intentional. The city is saying we're gonna bring our people together within our communities. We want you to be a part of helping us make this a more inclusive city and environment. It's about intentionality. And once that happens, everything else begins to fall into play like dominoes.
Absolutely. You know, Chief, talking about defunding the police, you know, this is a community that supports our police, supports our fire department, recently passed a millage renewal to make sure that the funding is there for the police. But as I said, I think, you know, my editorial comment about the whole defund the police movement is that it's an idea that if you invest in communities and you spend the money in other ways, you might not need that policing to go in and do enforcement. Now, I have a take on it based on some experience we have right here in the city of Sterling Heights. We know that the opioid epidemic is something that you and I have been working on, and the police have done a great job. I think there's an example and a lesson to be learned from that with our quick response team that was recently enacted. So for residents that don't know, our quick response team, for whenever there's an overdose, we have within 24, 48, sometimes 72 hours, we send out a police officer, a peer recovery coach, and a nurse, a medical professional to go out and make contact with those individuals or that individual who had the overdose and get them support and get them information to get into treatment. We've had a very high success rate with that. That to me seems like one of those examples of where rather than always just sending out a police officer to go arrest somebody, if you send out a community-based support team, that we can really make a difference in people's lives and show our police and show the way that the city delivers services in a different way. What is your take on that, and how successful would you say that program has been? And is there a way to sort of tie that into what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, that is community policing, right? It's not to go out and arrest a bad guy. We were one of the first to carry Narcan in our cars, which was kind of controversial at the time. Like, we're going to bring drugs and bring back some of that overdose. people, I remember the attitudes. People said, well, if they overdosed, that's too bad for them. They shouldn't have overdosed. Why are you bringing back somebody? I'm like, are you kidding me? And now look at how far we've come. So one of the first in the county to have Narcan, the Hope Not Handcuffs program. If you're overdosing or you're an addict, you come right to our lobby. We can get you an angel and get you help. We've been a member of that for years. And now with the quick response team, we were the first in the state of Michigan. We piloted a program with Families Against Narcotics to do house calls. So if you overdose on drugs and you're basically dead, Narcan, come back to life. Our officer shows up with that nurse, that caseworker, and we get you help and support that day. We can get you into treatment that day, and our success rate has been between 60 and 70%. We started back in February with this program. So these are things, unusual things the police departments didn't do 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, you'd be, most police chiefs would probably say, are you kidding me? That is not a role of the police department. Well, yeah, it is a role, because if someone continues to use drugs, they will continue, a drug habit could easily cost $200 to $500 a day. Where do you get $200 to $500 a day? You steal. You break into people's cars, their garages, their house. You commit crimes. We know this in law enforcement. When someone's house is broken into, it's probably a very high likelihood someone that's addicted to drugs trying to pay for a habit. So this is absolutely part of our job, and kind of breaking that mold and rethinking about how you provide service. I think you're exactly right. We're going to do more of this in Sterling Heights.
Yeah, I think there's definitely corollaries outside of just the opioid epidemic and drug abuse, whether it's anything that's going on in our communities in terms of breaking the law. We can figure out a way to partner with mental health professionals or other service organizations to get the help that the community needs rather than locking them up. I want to switch gears for just a minute here and ask about, we've had a discussion about the ways that the city can build trust and the way that the city can reach out, like you were saying, Darlene, getting out to the African American community and building that trust and hearing from them. Recently, the city has been in the process of creating what was originally going to be called the Diversity and Inclusion Commission and might end up becoming called a Community Alliance. Joel, I want to ask you, there was pushback from the community because I think it's a natural human trait that none of us want to feel like we're part of the problem. And when the city starts talking about doing things to raise awareness and bring, unity, a lot of people seem to push back on that, saying we're already a unified city, and if you create this diversity commission, that'll just serve to divide the community. What do we need to do as city leaders to make sure that we're getting the message out that this is not something that's going to be used to divide people, but instead is going to be something to lift everybody up and be a net positive for all people? And on that, I think the part of the reason is that no resident, no citizen wants to think that they're a racist or that they're part of the problem, like I said. But inherently within all of us, my feeling is that if we're not actively working to break down those barriers and bring people up, then we're part of the problem. Can you speak to that and talk about what the city can do to help in that regard?
Well, I think, Mayor Taylor, you make a great point about that, because that was a true disappointment to see that happen on that diversity and inclusion vote for city council, to see them vote that down. To me, that's about leadership. And if you want to make change, we say you have to walk the talk. It's easy to talk about diversity and inclusion, but you have to be in the forefront. You have to show leadership and say that, okay, even though this isn't the easy, most, popular political thing to do, it's about doing the right thing. And like I say, Sterling Heights, to me, when it comes to Macomb County, has certainly been in the forefront about doing things. I mean, I see it with the police department, I see it with other things, but it doesn't mean that, okay, we're good now, we can just kind of walk away from it. There has to be real leadership, and there has to be a willingness to kind of put yourself out there. And that's something that elected officials have to be willing to do. Because if you know there's an issue, you know that there's a problem, then take action to correct it. Don't just sit back and say, oh, we haven't had any quote unquote problems here. Because how do they know? I mean, unfortunately, with Sterling Heights City Council reflects a lot of the elected officials throughout the county. You see so few people of color. So of course, people that are in black, brown, and other communities of color are going to say, how do you understand really what's going on, since, you don't know, you may say that, oh yes, we want this to happen, we want to, make progress, then show it.
Darlene, we have the police chief here. We've had a discussion about policing, but obviously racial injustice and equity encompasses a lot more than just policing. To me, the one way that we're all bound together, and when you look at surveys and studies, we all want to have a safe and secure economic future. We all want to have jobs and careers that we find rewarding. And I think one of the ways that that this pandemic and that these calls for racial justice and equity, one of the things that's been very apparent is that not every person in the United States feels like they're in control of their future, and that racial inequality is impacting people at an economic level in a way that other races, for example, that white Americans maybe don't see. Can you talk about what the city's role here is to ensure that every community, regardless of race, has the same opportunity and has the same ability to have a secure financial future for their family?
Absolutely. It's about transparency. It's about everyone actually feeling that they know what is going on in their city and in their community. They know where the opportunities are. They know where the opportunities for access and for funding and for resources are within their community. That's what it is all about. That is how you create economic wealth and growth. It's not about taking something away from someone else in order to give to the next person, because there is enough to go around. When we look at this country from a historic perspective, there have been generations, I'm talking 30 and 40 generations of wealth being created for just one particular race, while all of the other races were not able to partake in those same level of opportunities. But when you have the ability to spread the wealth and spread the resources, then you spread and you increase economic development, you create and spread urban development, you create and spread higher education, better educational opportunities, better housing, just all across the board. From a governmental perspective, it just increases when everyone has the ability to have the same level of access and the same level of opportunity is going to create fundamental growth throughout any city as a whole. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, I think that's very on point, that when communities of color and marginalized communities have the ability to participate in the same way that everyone else does, it's a cliche, but all ships rise together. Joel, I want to ask you, as I've said before, nobody wants to feel like they're part of the problem, but there's no doubt that there are systemic problems that are in place, that barriers that are maybe invisible to people like me. What can we as a city do to help break down those barriers for the communities in our city that are struggling to get ahead and don't have the same opportunities as Darlene was talking about?
Well, I really think it's about opportunity, as Darlene mentioned. And again, and I hope that people of Sterling Heights understand, this is about, opportunities. This is not about some unfair advantage. Nobody's asking for preferential treatment or anything like that. It's just saying make the opportunities available to everybody. Resources are especially, important. When it comes to things like having, the people that work in the city reflect the residents and everything. Make sure that outreach is there, and not just for the police department, which is of course is important, but I think what happens is a lot of times it kind of falls off a cliff once you get past the police department. City Hall needs to look that way. Every area needs to look that way. There needs to be something where there's real opportunity, because you still hear things that are so disappointing. Like recently the CEO of Wells Fargo said, well, we'd have more blacks in executive positions, but we can't find anybody. And I mean, and that insults, black people throughout the country then, because we know there's people there, take the time to look for them. And again, not for preferential or special treatment, but just for real opportunity. And I really think that's what this comes down to.
Well, one of the things that I've heard from my colleagues on the city council and from those who have participated in the African American Coalition is that the voices weren't being heard not because they weren't out there, but because they didn't feel that they had an outlet to express themselves. And by the city's intentional action of bringing this coalition together has given that forum and given that space for the voices to be heard. So I completely agree with you that you have to feel welcomed and you have to feel like you're part of the city in order to be able to get your voice heard. So we're running out of time, but what I want to do is what I've done with the other three panels on public health and on the economic crisis is I want to go to each one of you. 2020 has been a very difficult year for all of us for a number of reasons. But I want to ask, as we go into the fall and we go into the next year, what is it that you see as reason for optimism? Whether it's in policing or whether it's in racial injustice and equity, what gives you hope that we're going to be having a better year in 2021? Chief, what are the reasons you see for optimism?
Well, in police work, the pendulum always swings left and right. If there's a national, whatever, it's Rodney King in the 90s or Ferguson, we're used to this in law enforcement. So we felt the pendulum definitely, was swung way over during the summer months. It's coming back now. We're having residents engage with our police department. We have implemented programs, and our recruitment process is even more robust this year. And I'm hearing this from all these other chiefs of police. They're all changing their use of force policy, more outreach programming. So sometimes it takes a crisis in order to move the needle towards more justice and equity. That's what happened here this last summer. So I know going into 2021, there'll be a change in law enforcement. There's no doubt about it. It's already taken place. If you're a police chief and you haven't made changes, you have missed out, and we're going to see much more of that in 2021.
I think it's a great opportunity when the police do show that they're actively engaged in the community. They're going to get the support of that community. Your community is going to be safer. Your neighborhood's going to be safer, and it's going to be a better place to live for everybody. Joel Rutherford, what are you most optimistic about going into 2021?
Well, I'm optimistic because young people especially are turning out. We saw it at the Hall Road March, where there's 5,000 to 6,000 people. It wasn't just a bunch of old guys like me out there. Okay, there was a lot of young folks, and that's what I'm glad to see, because I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s, so I remember what that was like. But of course, we didn't have, social media to all of a sudden turn so many people out. But the idea is they're engaged, That's what I'm glad to see, because I think what happens is that will, kind of make a groundswell that will keep pressure on, a lot of us older people to say, hey, things have to change. They're not going to just stand by and accept the status quo, but that gets more people involved. And I'm hoping that, with the protests, with the marches and other things, the one thing from my perspective is I see more people wanting to vote. I see more people wanting to be involved, because like I tell people, I said, you don't have to run for city council or something else, but at least show up at the meetings. Know what's going on in your city. Make your voices heard. And I'm seeing more of that, and especially Sterling Heights, Macomb County, and that's what I'm really, really hopeful and positive about.
Well, certainly we've had issues in the past with policing or with racial injustice, and I don't know during my lifetime that we've ever seen the sort of movement that we have in the last 4 or 5 months. So very good reason to be optimistic that that's going to continue through. We've seen a lot of changes already, and hoping that that momentum continues. Darlene King, what are you most optimistic about? What causes you to feel like we're going to turn a corner soon?
What causes me to feel like we're going to turn a corner soon is looking at the individuals such as yourselves, which don't look like I look. You don't come from where I come from. But the voices of those that are in leadership, CEOs, CFOs, presidents, mayors, chiefs of police, that are consisting primarily of white males that are really getting involved in this conversation, who have roles and positions of power and leadership. They have the ability to lean in and be inclusive leaders and lead from a space of inclusivity. And so because I'm seeing that rise up more and more every day from communities and corporations and for-profits and residents of just communities and cities that are not minorities, that gives me hope that 2021 is going to be a different year because we have the voices of all literally being a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Darlene. We're going to have to leave it there. Darlene King, Joel Rutherford, Chief Dale Wojciechowski, thank you for joining me. Most importantly, thank you for joining me for the 2020 virtual State of the City. I hope you found these conversations to be helpful and worthwhile, maybe even inspiring. I know I have. We've had a challenging 2020, but Sterling Heights has always met our challenges and come out stronger, and I'm sure we will this time too. Thank you again. Thank you for joining me for that very important discussion. I'm Mayor Michael Taylor. This has been the 2020 Virtual State of the City. For other important segments like the one you just watched, join us on our city's YouTube page at SHTV1.